It began on a warm, sticky summer morning in Virginia. The heat made the air feel thick, and I could sense my scarf clinging to my neck as I stood in front of a modest brick house. This was the start of my first job in America, a far cry from the dusty streets of Bala where I grew up. I'd never imagined leaving behind my family and the small world I knew. But life had its own unexpected plans. The Jacobs family, who at first glance seemed perfect, needed a nanny, and I needed the money. It wasn't just about earning a paycheck. It was about showing my parents and siblings that I could thrive in a country completely different from my own. At 33, single and fiercely independent, a rare combination for a Jordanian woman, I was determined to prove myself. Brianna Jacobs, the wife, was polished and striking, dressed in tailored blouses and designer heels that clicked on the marble floors of their spacious home. She greeted me with a warm smile. Her blonde hair was neatly swept up, and she spoke with a measured American cadence that made every word feel important. Then there was her husband, Zach Jacobs, a tall man with a relaxed charm that immediately put people at ease. His sandy brown hair curled slightly at the ends, and the laugh lines on his face hinted at a life filled with joy rather than stress. That day, he simply nodded politely and handed me a cup of tea. Their children, Splendor, 5, and Emmanuel, 3, were bundles of energy and curiosity. Although I was nervous, having never worked as a nanny before, Brianna reassured me that my experience as the eldest of 6 siblings was more than enough. Kind yet unmistakably a perfectionist, she handed me a hefty binder filled with household rules, meal plans, daily schedules, emergency contacts, and even instructions on how to fold laundry. For the first several weeks, nothing extraordinary happened. I'd rise at 6 a.m. to make breakfast, pack lunch for Splendor, and keep Emmanuel entertained until it's nap time. My days were spent telling stories, reading books, finger painting, and chasing Emmanuel around the backyard, while evenings found me retiring to my small basement room, tired yet content. About a month in, something changed. One afternoon, while I was on the kitchen floor cleaning up a spill from Emmanuel's juice box, I noticed Zach watching me. "You're amazing with them," he said, leaning casually against the counter. Startled, I looked up. "Oh, thank you, sir," I replied, to which he gently insisted, "Please call me Zach." His genuine tone and the warmth in his smile made my cheeks flush. Back home, men rarely spoke to women with such kindness unless they had ulterior motives. But Zach was different. From that moment, I started noticing him more. The way he asked if I'd had lunch, helped carry groceries, and lingered in the kitchen as I cooked. Meanwhile, Brianna was often away on high-powered business trips, leaving Zach and me alone with the children. One evening, as I set the table, he asked, "Don't you ever get tired?" I shrugged and replied, "It's my job. I'm used to it." He softly countered, "You shouldn't have to do everything for everyone." Those words stayed with me long after he left. It was unusual for someone to acknowledge my hard work so openly. In my culture, a woman is expected to give endlessly without complaint. Yet Zach's sincere words made me feel seen and appreciated. I tried to ignore the growing connection, reminding myself that I was a Muslim woman with deep-rooted traditions and boundaries that could never be crossed, even with a kind, attractive employer like him. But, as I would soon discover, life rarely follows a simple path. That summer stretched on with long, hot days. Brianna's business trips became more frequent, and as Zach and I spent more time alone with Splendor and Emmanuel, the boundaries between us began to blur. At first, it was just shared jokes, fleeting glances, and conversations that lingered a little too long. Deep down, however, I knew I was venturing into dangerous territory. I could still hear my mother's voice, stern and unwavering. "Aliyah, remember who you are. The world will tempt you, but stay true to yourself." I had always prided myself on my self control and my ability to resist modern temptations, but Zach was different. One rainy evening, with the children asleep and the only sound the soft tapping of rain against the windows, I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when Zach walked in. Need some help? He asked, rolling up his sleeves. I replied, No, I'm almost done. Yet he stayed by my side. We worked in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, he broke the quiet. Do you ever miss home? I admitted that I did, every day, but explained that I had come here for a purpose. You've sacrificed so much, he said, admiration tinting his voice. I was taken aback. Why do you say that? I asked. Because I see the way you put everyone else first, the way you never complain. It's rare. No one had ever spoken to me like that, not even back home. I felt a mix of gratitude and guilt, as if simply listening to him was somehow a betrayal. I tried to brush it off, but his steady gaze made it clear he meant every word. In that moment, a subtle connection sparked between us, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings we were both hesitant to name. That night, I went to bed with a heavy heart, torn between my deeply held faith and the growing emotions I could no longer ignore. I prayed for strength, clarity, and the courage to remain true to myself, even as I sensed that my life was about to change in ways I never could have imagined. I thought I could keep things strictly professional, believing that the fleeting connection I felt with Zach would vanish like a passing cloud. But life rarely works that way. Day by day, small, seemingly insignificant moments chipped away at the walls I had built around my heart, with Brianna frequently away, attending conferences in New York, business meetings in Chicago, or staying overnight at luxury hotels. I became a constant presence with Zach as he managed the daily chaos of raising Splendor and Emmanuel. The children adored him. Splendor would climb into his lap during story time, clutching his shirt while he read in funny voices, and Emmanuel mimicked his every move like a devoted shadow. Observing their interactions, I saw a tenderness in Zach that stirred something deep within me. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry in the living room, Zach entered, carrying a small box. I thought you might like this, he said, setting it on the coffee table. Curious, I asked, what is it? He opened the box to reveal a collection of cookbooks. I noticed you've been trying out new recipes lately, he explained, and I thought this might inspire you. I was rendered speechless, not by the gift itself, but by the thoughtfulness behind it. No one had ever noticed the little details of my efforts before. Thank you, I murmured, my voice catching slightly. It's nothing, he replied, though the look in his eyes suggested otherwise. That evening, after the children were finally asleep, Zach and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen again. A quiet ritual that had emerged after a hectic day. I was wiping the counters when he said, Alia, you work too hard. I looked up, startled. It's just my job, I protested. No, he said softly, shaking his head. You do more than just your job. You care deeply for these kids, loving them as if they were your own. They're so easy to love. I tried to deflect by saying, so are you. But his words lingered between us, heavy and dangerous. I wanted to explain that I wasn't as simple as he thought, that I was complicated, flawed, and bound by principles he couldn't fully understand. But instead, I said nothing. In the following days, I attempted to convince myself that nothing had changed. Yet deep down, I knew that Zach's presence was inescapable. His laughter echoed through the house, his scent lingered in the air, and his voice replayed in my mind long after he was gone. I started noticing the small things about him, the crinkle in his eyes when he smiled, the soft humming while he did the dishes, and the way he made sure the children always said thank you and please. He wasn't just kind, he was thoughtfully kind in a way that felt both rare and precious. One afternoon, while I was pushing Splendor on the swing in the backyard, Zach appeared with a tray holding a glass of iced tea. "I thought you might need a break," he said as he handed it to me. I accepted it gratefully, and we sat together on the porch steps watching the children play. Suddenly, he asked, "Do you ever think about what your life might have been if you'd stayed in Bala?" Surprised, I replied, "What do you mean?" He elaborated, wondering aloud about the life I might have had if I hadn't left. I admitted that I did wonder sometimes, but insisted I came here for a reason. His steady gaze made me hesitate, and though part of me had found a new purpose, I also knew things were far from simple. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" he remarked softly, and I agreed, my voice barely more than a whisper. I longed to tell him how much his kindness meant to me, how his presence made me feel cherished in a world that often felt cold and unfamiliar. But I couldn't. I reminded myself that these feelings were dangerous and conflicted with the values I'd grown up with. Every stolen glance and whispered conversation made it harder to maintain the distance I thought I needed. As weeks passed, Brianna's frequent absences left Zach and me increasingly alone. In our shared moments, whether through a lingering touch in the hallway or a secretive whisper in the kitchen after the children slept, the connection between us deepened. I felt as if I was leading a double life. By day, I was Aliyah, the devoted nanny, reading bedtime stories, preparing meals, and caring for Splendor and Emmanuel with a warm smile. But by night, in the hush of the darkened house, I became someone entirely different. A woman drawn to Zach's gentle affection, a woman who began to question everything she once held sacred. I tried to convince myself that our affair would eventually fade, that it was only a temporary lapse, but each passing day made it clear that I was falling deeper. The more time we spent together, the harder it was to ignore the magnetic pull between us, even as I felt the weight of my guilt growing. I knew I was betraying my faith, my family, and even my own self. Yet Zach had become an irresistible part of my life. Then came a stormy Friday evening that seemed to mirror the turmoil inside me. After tucking in the children and finishing the dinner cleanup, I went downstairs expecting to find Zach in his usual spot on the couch. Instead, I found him in the kitchen, staring out the window with a glass of wine in hand. His sleeves were rolled up, and the soft kitchen light accentuated the sharp lines of his face. He looked deep in thought, and when I hesitated in the doorway, he spoke without turning around. "You don't drink wine, do you?" I replied, "No, it's against my faith." And he nodded, finally turning to face me. I ventured, "So you're different. Is that a bad thing?" A small smile played on his lips as he replied, "Not at all. It's refreshing." I busied myself wiping down the counters, trying to ignore the way his words made my heart race. The tension in the room was palpable until, after a long silence, he said, "Aliyah." I began to respond, but he interrupted. "I'm sorry. I know it's wrong, but I can't help what I feel. I see you every day caring for my kids, and you make this house a home. I've never met anyone like you." My breath caught in my throat as his words sank in. I tried to protest. "But Zach, you're married. You have a family." Yet he continued, eyes filling with pain. "I know, and it hurts. Brianna is always away, and when she's here, we're like strangers. You're the only one who makes me feel truly seen." In that charged moment, I was torn between what I knew was wrong and the undeniable pull I felt toward him. Before I could stop him, his lips met mine in a kiss that started gently and then deepened into a passion we'd both tried so hard to deny. His hand slid down to my waist, drawing me closer until, in that stormy night, everything else faded away. Brianna, the children, even the beliefs I had once held so dear. We crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. After that night, our secret meetings became our hidden addiction. Every stolen touch, every lingering look in the hall, and every whispered promise in the quiet of the house fueled an intimacy that made me forget who I was supposed to be. By day, I was the loving nanny. By night, I belonged to Zach, surrendering to a passion that felt both exhilarating and devastating. Yet the guilt of living a lie began to take its toll. I was betraying not only my own values and faith, but also the trust of a family who depended on me. The tension grew, and eventually I knew I had to choose. I started searching for another job in secret, knowing that I couldn't remain in a place where I felt trapped by the weight of my own mistakes. Though the thought of leaving Splendor and Emmanuel broke my heart, I realized it was the only way to begin finding myself again. When the time came to hand in my resignation, Brianna was stunned, her confusion and concern clear in her eyes as she asked if everything was all right. I explained that I'd been offered another position and that it was time for me to move on. Even Zach's reaction, a silent mix of anger, sadness, and regret, couldn't change my decision. On the day I left, the tearful goodbyes from Splendor and Emmanuel, along with Brianna's heartfelt thanks, made the departure bittersweet. As I loaded my suitcase into a taxi and watched the house recede into the distance, a strange relief mingled with sorrow inside me. In the small apartment I soon called home, I knelt on the floor and prayed for the first time in months. With tears streaming down my face, I asked for forgiveness, strength, and the chance to rediscover who I truly was. I knew I wasn't perfect. I'd made mistakes, but I was ready to reconnect with my faith, reclaim the values I had abandoned, and forgive myself for the choices that led me astray. That journey taught me that healing is never simple. Every moment of passion, every secret whisper, and every act of kindness shared with Zach had left an indelible mark on my soul. Yet I also learned that I had to break free from the chains of deceit to rebuild my identity and find peace within myself. Thank you for following my story. If you found this journey as gripping as I did and would like to hear more stories that challenge the heart and mind, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support means the world to me,